Okay, hello friends, welcome back to another video. We're going to break down this image that I shot of Katie Taylor for Gymshark. We shot this in Belfast earlier in the year. I'm going to give you a little breakdown of the shoot, how I lit it, and a little bit of retouching and colour grading in the mix there. Okay, so the premise of this shoot, it was a 6-day shoot for International Women's Day. Gymshark were shooting with a variety of women telling their story about who inspires them and who lifts them higher. This was shoot 1 of the campaign. This was with Katie Taylor and her mum, and as part of the shoot we got some shots of her punching the bag here, being that she is probably the greatest female boxer of all time. If you haven't seen the Katie documentary on Netflix, go and check that out. It is awesome. It's a truly awesome story. Throughout the day we shot video and stills, which is what we quite often do with Gymshark. As a company, they produce a lot of content, both video and stills. Often we work quite close together, the stills team and the video team. This particular shot, which is the shot that Gymshark used in the end for their campaign, this was actually shot whilst the guys were shooting video, and because they weren't using any audio at this particular time, or they weren't recording any audio at this particular time, I was right beside the camera operator there, shooting away as Katie punched away on the bag. And we got this quite early on in the day. Whilst the guys were shooting some video, I was checking the images on the laptop and just kind of seeing what was working and what wasn't working. What was so great about this image is just everything kind of fell into place here. We've got kind of like this dynamic flow of hair here, which is often quite hard to get. And also, you know, as with athletes, when they're exerting themselves, often you can get some weird expressions or pained expressions, but this is a nice balance here from Katie, where you can tell she's putting in effort, but her face isn't all scrunched up. The clothing and everything looks great. It just kind of all helps create a dynamic feel. So my thinking was, upon seeing this image, showing it to the client, and everyone loved this image, I was thinking, right, if we get some time towards the end of the day, which we had designated for stills, I'm going to try and recreate this with a little bit of flash, where we've got a little bit more control of the light, and just kind of sprinkle a little extra magic on it with the lighting. Needless to say, I don't think we quite got there when it came to flash, because this is the actual image that they went with, and this is the one that we shot kind of behind the scenes whilst they were shooting video. If I show you the raw of what we did get, of one of the better images that we did get afterwards, you can see first of all I've shot this way too dark. The sun has set here in the background. It's not spilling into the building at all. You do have that golden, you can see the sun is golden in the background here, but because none of it's spilling into in here, it's all very blue. I've got a flash just behind the bag here, which is quite high power, which is giving us this clip. If I just zoom in, it's giving us a little clip here, and kind of this bit here, just helping Katie stand out from the background. And I've also got another, if I just extend this a little bit, I've also got a flash, I've also got a flash here, which is bouncing off a wall and then just spilling back in to help create this real soft look down the side here. So if I just take that away, you can see this soft light just on our left, on Katie's right hand side, which is kind of similar to this. I mean, looking at these two side by side, you can tell why they went for the one they went for. However, with a little bit of colour grading in Capture One, if you want to see my full colour grading flow, I'll link a video up here. It breaks down how I colour grade from Capture One and then importing into Photoshop. So go check that out if that intrigues you at all. With a little bit of colour grading, that brings us to this image here. I've just balanced out the colour a little bit, warmed it up, lightened everything up a little bit, and if I can just explain myself here for a second, you can see it is, the way the light is falling is kind of similar to this. You can see we've got the clip down Katie's left hand side and we've got a soft fill on her right hand side, our left, which is kind of similar to here. They've retouched this quite bright. It was shot in daylight. It's quite a nice, clean, crisp feel to it. We are a little pixelated here because I've just pulled this one off their website. But what I wanted to do when I say I was controlling the light a bit more is just get this contrast, this dark bit down the middle here. I just feel that that's a bit grittier and kind of, what's the word, atones to you know, Katie's background of being a boxer and boxing gyms and everything. We could always let me just do a quick brighten up here. We could always really bring that back and just hold the lights and then just brighten the image up a little bit. I'm just doing this quite rough and ready, which kind of brings us more in tune with this, but even still with the colour grade and stuff, this is a much cleaner, crisper image. However, to entertain myself, this is kind of where we are. So yeah, what I really fancied doing was bringing this image on a little bit. I've colour graded it in Capture One, as you've seen there, and I just want to tidy up the background a little bit. I don't tend to do too much retouching to skin, especially in athletes and people when they're in action. I don't feel like there's a need to like beautify that at all. It's all about taste really, and yeah, I think it would just look weird if I like smoothed out the skin of athletes whilst they're doing it. That's not for me. So what I'll do with this image is I will tidy up the background a little bit. I might brighten up some of the highlights on Katie here, I'm not too sure. And I might just create a little bit of a flare kind of coming in here. We can see this is where the harsh light is coming from. It's falling on the right hand side of the image on Katie's left. So this in theory should be our main light source. It's flash, but I want to try and make this look as daylight and as sunlight as possible, so I might try and kick in a little bit of flare there and just do a little bit of the same here. Now you shouldn't have two separate sources of flaring. There is only one sun and I don't want this to look too flashed. I don't want it to be obvious that it's flashed. I kind of always try and go for a natural look in my images, so when things look too flashed, especially out in situ, at the moment that's not quite to my taste. So yeah, that second flare will have to be very subtle, almost unnoticeable. But let's get into it. Let me show you a little bit of my retouching flow. So first thing I always do is duplicate the layer. That way you've always got your base layer, you've always got the image you started with. If everything goes wrong, you can just highlight all your layers and delete that, and there we go. You're just back to where you started. Hopefully things don't end up that way, but if you started doing any work with the patch tool and stuff on your only original layer and you wanted to undo that several steps down the line, you can't undo it. So here we are, we duplicate the layer. So first thing I do here is just zoom into the background and just tidy up things. Now this might seem a little bit mundane and it's like, why are you bothering doing that? One thing that I always like to retouch out is potential distractions. So, you know, things don't need to be too beautified and or anything like that. I just like to get rid of potential distractions, and that counts for when you're retouching portraits as well. You know, any blemishes or anything like that, it's not a case of like making someone perfect. It's really just getting rid of anything which is a major distraction to the eye. As a photographer, you want to guide the viewer in a certain way, and if there are certain things that are distracting from that, then potentially it's your job to remove those distractions. And that's actually how I kind of think of blemishes, you know, on someone's face. If someone is going through a period of like having bad skin or anything, there's nothing wrong with retouching out any blemishes. It's not like a permanent feature of that person. It's not like you're altering reality or anything like that. It's a blemish, for example, is something that will be gone in a few days. It's not like you're pinching anyone's waist in or making any legs longer and anything like that. I kind of tend to look at that as being my job, to get in camera and get everything right there, and just things like blemishes and distractions and stuff, get those out of the way in Photoshop, if that makes sense. I hope I'm justifying myself here. So back to it, I'm just going to get rid of any little bump distractions, any little joins in the wall, anything that looks a bit too messy. So, you know, like I might be looking at this a bit too closely, but there's like these joins in the wall here which kind of just make the image feel a little bit too messy. There's also this mark here, which, you know, if I was to get rid of that, it's quite close to the hair. Yeah, that's not too bad. That's not too bad at all. Boom. So I'm just using the patch tool here, which is quite a rough and ready way of doing things. You know, if you want to invert curve layers and zoom right in and kind of paint things out, be my guest. Unless anything's getting printed quite large, I tend not to do that, especially if it's just going on social. No one's going to be like zooming a million times in and checking, you know, your retouching process. Don't feel guilty about using simple things like patches and clones, so long as it's not too obvious, you're all good. We do have this crease on Katie's shirt here, as there is like a little bit of what's that? How do you say that? Moiring, M-O-I-R-E, moiring in camera. It's going to be really tricky. I always find that really tricky to kind of use the patch tool and get rid of that. That being said, I've just done it whilst I'm talking there, and it looks so much better. If we flick that layer off and on, you just kind of get a bit of a smoother transition on the clothing, and you can see if I switch it off, it's kind of distracting. Once you see it, you know, you're wondering, what is that there? You can see a little bit how it is a little bit rough. I'm not gonna lie, that's a little bit rough. You can see here there's not quite a smooth gradient in the tones there. But again, this could be one of the things that you're just looking at, and you can only see it if you know it. Am I mad about that? When you zoom in, you can barely see it. Oh, I'll just do another little bit here and see how we go. Okay, that's not the worst. Okay, so here we are with just a couple of minutes of patchwork tool. We've got rid of some of the distractions in the background, and I'm not too annoyed about that at all. Next thing I would do is I'd probably get a curves layer, brighten things up a little bit, and I would create a masked layer from that and just press Command I and inverse it. So now you have that brightness from the curves there, almost hiding behind the image, just waiting to come in. And to bring that in, you just need to use an eraser. And all I'm going to do here is just kind of emphasize some of the contrast, especially in the neck muscles here, and perhaps in some of the clothes, and just brighten up the side of Katie's face here, just to emphasize the contrast, rather than applying a contrast layer to the whole image. Using a high inverted curves layer and also a darker low inverted curves layer, and rubbing that in where you want it to be, it gives you a lot more control. Yeah, I feel like it just helps add a bit more dynamics to the image, if that makes sense. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to use quite a big brush here. I'm not going to be too precious. One thing you have to watch is your opacity and flow. Just turn those to 20. Got my razor here. I even go a bit bigger. And I'm just gonna do a quick overall painting here. A little bit under the eyes. The darkness under the eyes is nice. It helps kind of give that sort of dark boxing gym feel, but it's just a little too much here. And I'm just gonna take the darkness out of that shadow that was falling on Katie's on Katie's face here. You can see it just here. This is actually a shadow from the hair. You can see it starting up here and it continues all the way around. I just think that it does look a bit distracting. Okay, and I'm going quite quick here, but that's nothing to stress too much about. See, if you were doing like beauty or anything, you might be tempted to like get rid of these shadows and the little blemish on the lips here, but these are athletes we're talking about. This is a boxer we're talking about. We don't need to be too precious and beautifying people and doing crazy retouching. Personally, with retouching, I just, you know, when I'm doing stuff like this, like it's really just correcting the light. You're not retouching anyone's skin or changing their actual physical appearance. You're just correcting your mistakes as a photographer that you made on the day. So, you know, I could have spent a lot more time in lighting this so that that shadow wasn't there in the first place, but to get that completely precise on the day, we'd be there all day, just getting this one shot. However, I can correct that in Photoshop and kind of correct how the light falls on Katie here. So there we go. To look at it by itself, you wouldn't know. When I flick it on and off, it looks a bit much. I'm just going to work into that a little bit more and then adjust the fill and opacity on that layer to kind of bring it in tune with the rest of the image. So let's get into that here. You just got to keep flicking on and off just so you don't go too far, especially when you're doing lots of little individual strokes. You don't want to have to be pressing back all the time when you don't have different layers to fall back onto. Just going back up to the face here, don't know why I'm going back up there. That's not the end of the world. I'm not too mad at that, to be honest. I'll probably take the fill down on that a little bit, and it looks a bit more tasteful. Like I always say, retouching is just about taste. You can know all the technical stuff you want, but if you don't learn what it is that you like and how you can effectively convey that in Photoshop, then that's going to be a struggle. It's just about doing things tastefully to your taste. And also developing your own taste, you know, researching what photographers you like, what's their process, find out how they like things if you can, put your own spin on it and develop your own taste that way. Okay, we're pretty much there with that. I'm just going to call that face high, and I'm going to do another one for the clothing, and I'll just watch this and make sure it's not being overexposed there, and just rub that back in. Let's get back into that here. Because this is clothing and we don't need to be too precious about it, I'm just going to up my opacity on my rubber to 40. Have a little look at that. It's maybe a bit too much. Okay, we'll go with 30 and we'll get into it here. It's not too crazy, it's really subtle, really subtle. And we're just bringing up the highlights, which will, you know, sitting next to the shadows as they are, will just help give a bit more contrast. And I might work into the shadows and darken the shadows a little bit as well. I find that just helps, like I say, give a little bit more contrast to the whole image and give it a bit more of a dynamic feel. I'm not too precious with this. Maybe I should be. There's probably some retouchers watching this whose toes are curling here, cringing at this. But there we are. I'm just bringing up some of the highlights a little bit and see how we get on. Just working into that a little. Zoom out here. Off and on. So you can clearly see some of the brush work here, but once I get through this and I change the opacity of this layer, it's really going to blend into it a little bit more. So we are on, and eraser. Just going to go for a slightly bigger eraser here, and I'm going to turn my opacity down quite a bit because there isn't actually too much light hitting the front of Katie's body here. This might actually just be a reflector. I think this is just a silver reflector on the floor, which is bouncing up to kick in a little bit of light here. That's a little too much. See how much that came up there? Just going to go over here and then go down. That doesn't need anything there at all, actually. Yeah, I've just remembered there must be a little bit of a silver reflector on the floor which has helped kicking up. You can see the underside of Katie's arm here. There's a silver quality to that light which is coming in compared to the slightly warmer light which is clipping the back of her shoulder here. But without that, if that was all dark, again, I feel like we'd have lost something. So yeah, well done me. Okay, and a little bit there. So this is our clothing high. It just helps add a little bit of something. And I now bring the fill on this down a little bit till I feel like it is kind of blending all together. I'm not mad at that. If I group these two highs together, we have before and after. Subtle changes, very subtle changes. But all these subtle changes added together, when we add them up at the end, we'll see a completely different image. Well, not a completely different image, but it'll have a different feel to it, I hope. Okay, and I'm just going to do the same with the lows. I don't think I need to darken anything up on her face at all, really. I might just emphasize some of the neck muscles and stuff here. I don't really need to darken any of this stuff. So let's get my eraser, zoom in here, bring it down in size. What are we at? 20. Yeah. I'm just going to darken the shadows a little bit, and maybe a little bit under her chin here, just to help her jawline stand out a little bit more. Just underneath her chin there. Yeah, cool. This all seems dark enough to me. Don't need to darken that too much. And I'm just going to carry on the same layer and do the clothes as well here, just some of the creases. So I've gone through that on the high layer and the low layer on Katie's face, and on the clothing I'm just going to adjust the low layer. We can see it's low, so you can see it's dark up here in the properties window, and I'm just going to bring the fill down a little bit so it's not too obvious. And if I toggle that off and on, it's not too obvious, but I feel the darker shadows are just adding a little bit. And if I group that with the rest of them here, oh, what have I done there? I've just moved my masking there. So if I group that with the rest of them and we go off and on, I feel like that little bit of extra contrast is just adding a little bit of value to the picture here. What do you reckon? I've driven myself nuts at times just clicking these groups of layers off and on, looking, zooming in on everything. Am I actually doing anything? I'm sure everyone feels this when they're retouching their own images. Is what you're doing actually making it better or worse? I don't know. But yeah, I feel that adds a little bit of something there. So as far as retouching to Katie goes, I'm not going to do much more. That's that. I'm not going to go delve into any skin retouching too much. I don't need to smooth her out and make her look rubbery or anything like that. From here, I'm going to do two more things. I'm going to add a little bit of light via like a flare effect, and I'm also going to sharpen the image. So let's begin with the flare and kind of emphasizing our light sources. What I'll usually do for this is I will get a new layer, I'll get my brush, I'll probably put that to 2000, I have the hardness to 0, I remember to put the opacity and flow at 200, and I will pop one there, and I'll duplicate that. Now, this is a technique that I've seen on YouTube, and I cannot explain the specifics to you, but I'll do my best, because I'm not fully up to speed with the technicalities. But you'll get your top layer and exaggerate that. So imagine, I kind of see this like, imagine it as a light bulb. If you stare at a light bulb, you've got that pure white center, which is just completely blown out, and then you've got the peripherals of that, which is how this is kind of falling here if you look at it. So I'll be sure to group these together as well, and then I will create a hue and saturation layer, two of them actually, because we're going to apply one layer to each. If you search on YouTube how to create flare, you'll probably find this video and you'll know it's the same one that I have been looking at. But I'll colorize this layer, and we don't want it red, we want it a bit warmer, we want it more like orange. I'll pop the saturation right up, and I'll also bring the brightness up as well. So I'll kind of get it to a point kind of like this, and I will just, actually, I will duplicate it now that it has the adjustments on it. And I'll hold down Option and apply it to each of these layers, and you'll see that it disappears, but we'll bring it back in a second, don't worry. I'll go back to this group, press transform and not skew, distort, and I'll just drag it across the image, and hopefully now you'll begin to see a little bit of a flare effect. And using distort you can kind of really shape this a little bit. I don't want too much of this weird oblong thing going on, but we're going to play with the opacity and stuff, and at the moment it might not look like it's doing anything, but once we toggle our layers off and on, you'll see. Okay, so at the moment it looks a bit crazy, like a big white patch, but we'll get to that. I've got an idea of how I'm going to go with this. Once you've got your light where it is, you can play with the lightness and the saturation here. So the darker I make this, the more this orange is going to come back in, and the more it's going to look like a warm sunlight almost. So it's kind of white there, it's got a tint of orange to it. That's kind of good. Your bottom layer is the center of this light, which isn't really going to feature in this at all, but I will set this to linear dodge. Yeah, and usually this has the most say, but by the time you've repositioned your flare, it's not really in the image. Hopefully this is all making sense. And I'll just turn down the opacity in that. You can see it gradually starting to disappear there, and I will usually have that at like under 10%. I'm probably going to paint that out a little bit actually, because it's weird that it's coming from in front of the bag when really the light source is behind the bag. If we look purely at Katie here and toggle off and on, we can see just how much that is doing. You can see it in the eye here. If I zoom in, you can see just how much work that flare is doing. Okay, so we're good there. I'm going to duplicate that just in case I need to go back to it, and I'm going to flatten this with Command E, and that way I can get my eraser out and set this quite high to like 40, a little bit bigger. We can probably go to like 750 or something here. Yeah. And just paint this out a little bit. Now it still looks a bit crazy, so I'm just going to bring the fill down. And there we go, that's looking nice and subtle there. We're still getting plenty of that light falling across Katie. The bag is still lightening up a little bit, but it does look like the light source is now coming from behind the bag rather than in front of it. So it looks a bit truer to what it actually is. Yeah, I love how that's spilling across there. There's a little bit of red in Katie's cheek here that I'm seeing, which is annoying me a little bit. So I might get into that in a second. What I'm going to do, just turn this off for a sec, and I'm going to duplicate this layer again. And yes, I'll flatten it again, and I will transform that, and I will flip it horizontal. Boom. And like I said at the start of this video, I'm just going to kick in a little bit here from this window. I know this isn't an actual obvious natural light source, but if I do this subtly, it won't look too crazy like it is a light source. And hopefully it just should add a little something to the image. Drag that across as well. Yeah, I'm really going to bring down the opacity on this one. Okay, cool. Bring down the fill here, way down. Toggle that off and on. That's adding a little something. I quite like what that's doing there. But I am just going to get my eraser. Make it a little bigger. And quite soft, 20% opacity. I don't want too much of that spilling over K here and ruining all the work that we've done with our high and low layers that we did earlier, but just enough to kick in a little something. Oh, we don't want this layer on. We want this one on, and this one on. If we group together our two flares, that's kind of where we're at. I often find this adds so much to an image, this technique. It really does make or break it sometimes. Okay, cool. And that red spot that we saw, I'm just going to create a hue and saturation layer. Go to red, bring up the saturation here, and it'll really emphasize the red, anything red that's in the image. We can just really hone in on this red cheek, which doesn't look that natural. The reason you up the saturation is you can play with it a little bit and really kind of narrow in on the specific part that you want to work with. And then bring the saturation down, so it's almost like you don't have your layer on at all. And you can probably just adjust the hue a little bit and the lightness. Then I would invert that layer, get my eraser, zoom in, and just probably a bit bigger, even bigger still. And that is so subtle, I will probably have my... and just rub that out a little bit. We don't want really like rosy cheeks, as if she's got makeup on. We want it to look as natural as possible. Okay, does that make too much of a difference? It makes a little bit of a difference, super subtle. Like I've mentioned, my retouching is pretty subtle, I would say. And if we group everything together with what we've done so far today, this is where we started, this is where we ended up. Just remove some distractions, emphasize some of the light. Yeah, it's alright. Duplicate that, flatten that, duplicate that again, and apply the high pass filter at about 8 pixels, and then probably go to soft light, I'd imagine, and that sharpens this up a little bit. At 100% fill, this is probably too much. I never leave this layer at 100% fill. I'll usually bring it down somewhere around 70. And most of the retouching techniques that I'm using here are like an accumulation of tips and tricks that I've picked up off other photographers, YouTube videos and other retouchers throughout the years, and I've just kind of mashed them together, taken little bits that I like, and yeah, this is like my usual workflow really, to be honest. I'm going to flatten that there, so we've got before, and after. Oh, actually, before and after. There we have it. That is the workflow for this image. Let me know which image you prefer and why, from this one that we used as the main campaign image and this one that I've just retouched just now. Personally, I love them both for different reasons. I love how light and bright and airy this feels. It's probably a much better campaign image, but I kind of like the grittiness to that, and because I probably put in a little more time with the lighting, there's probably that connection and wanting to own that myself as well that is probably making me a little bit biased. But here we are. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you picked up something. I hope you learned something, and if you didn't, I hope you just liked watching my process, and I will see you guys in the next one.